So often people will find my recipe, maybe the banana bread recipe, and they'll say, oh, I want to make this, but I don't have applesauce. What should I do? Well, that's simple. There's a lot of things you can substitute for applesauce. So here I have just normal store-bought unsweetened applesauce. And you want to get this general consistency. It also adds a little bit of sweetness, but there's a lot of things that can kind of mimic that. So I'm going to show you several fruits that you can use to get something really close to this applesauce. And it's probably something you already have in your kitchen. So the easiest, most common thing you can use instead of store-bought applesauce is an apple. All you need to do is core the apple, put it in your high-powered blender, and blend away. You don't even have to peel it. Now, if you don't have apples, you can also try using a banana. Now, you want the banana to be pretty ripe in order for this to work because it will give it that sweetness. And it also gets really similar consistency. Now, if you don't have any bananas, check your freezer, because if you're like me, you regularly have bananas in your freezer. And bananas that have been frozen and then defrosted can easily be mashed with a fork and are the perfect texture to replace applesauce. Now, in my banana bread recipe, it already uses 3 mashed bananas, so I don't like to substitute mashed banana for the applesauce because that's getting a little carried away. But I will use an apple. Another thing you can do is use peaches or nectarines. They work really well. And you just need to take out the pit and then blend it in your blender. There are a few other options if for some reason you don't have or can't have these fruits. You can also use pumpkin puree or mashed sweet potato. So just bake a few sweet potatoes or cook them in your Instant Pot, mash them up or put them in your blender, and they are a really similar consistency. And if they don't feel wet enough, you can always add a little bit of water. Okay, let's put this to the test. So first, we're going to use an apple as our stand-in. I'm going to just cut it into some pretty big chunks. I just basically want to get the seeds out. If you don't have a high-powered blender, you can use a food processor as well. Now I'm just going to pulse this for a minute. You could add some water if you want, but let's see how it goes without it. So you could scrape down the sides to get some of the bigger bits to get them a little smaller, but I'm pretty happy with this. Okay. Thank you. So as you can see, one apple is very close to the applesauce in the other. It might be a little chunkier in a few places, but it would work perfectly as a stand-in. Okay, the next thing we're going to test is using a nectarine. Now, the nectarine and peaches normally work pretty much the same. Now, these are a little past their prime, so we probably wouldn't just eat them, but I think they're going to work perfectly as an applesauce substitute. All I'm going to do is I'm going to cut them in half, take out the pit, and then put it in here. Now, depending on the size of your fruit, you might need to do 2 just to make sure you have enough. So far, I'm using a 1/2 cup measurements because that's often what I have in my recipes. So let's see how it goes. Okay, and then I'm just going to cut that into 4ths. And I'm leaving the peel on. Let's do this one too. Ooh, slippery little suckers. Okay, it's so soft I can just rip it apart. Again, you can add a little water, but I'm not going to, and I'm going to pulse it just for a moment. All right, that looks pretty good. I definitely could have just used one. So this is definitely creamy and looks a very similar consistency to the applesauce. Okay, lastly, I'm going to show you how a banana looks as a substitute for applesauce. It's important that your banana be a little bit brown. You want it to be ripe. That'll make it sweeter and it'll also break down better. Now, usually if I'm making this and throwing it in a recipe, I'm just going to mash it up with my fork in the mixing bowl. I'm not going to take the time to do it in a blender, but since I'm kind of comparing and contrasting these, I'm going to go ahead and use a blender for you today. Now, I would prefer this banana to be a little bit riper, but this is what we got to work with. All right. And I'm just going to use the pulse button again. Okay, looks pretty good. So this banana, which was fairly small, produced a little bit less. We would want to probably do 1.5 bananas for such a small banana, but a large banana would definitely make a 1/2 cup of the applesauce substitute. And as far as the consistency, I would say it's a little bit thinner than the others, but it would totally work. So this is the first store-bought applesauce to give you a comparison. Let's take a look at the homemade applesauce. It's a bit chunkier. We could blend that a little bit longer and we could probably get a smoother sauce. Okay, next is the nectarine. So there are some definite chunks in this, but it's very similar in consistency. And lastly is the banana. Definitely thinner, but the sweetness is definitely on par with the applesauce. So if you want to do some baking, but you're all out of applesauce, you can definitely give these options a try. Remember, you can also do mashed sweet potato or pumpkin puree as well. So there's a few times where applesauce can't be substituted for oil. If you're needing something to get really crispy, applesauce is not going to do it. If you're wanting to make a stir fry, you cannot use applesauce. I mean, I guess technically you could, but I wouldn't recommend it.